The gravestones in the unknown plot here at Grandview Cemetery are without names, only numbers, marking unidentifiable people who died in the space of about a half hour when more than 20 million tons of raging floodwater mixed with tangled debris came crashing down on the good people of Johnstown, Pennsylvania. More than 2,200 people lost their lives on May 31st, 1889. Our worst man-made disaster in American history outside of 9/11, and very few people even know it ever happened. Coming to you from Central Park in downtown Johnstown, such a beautiful city, lots of historic buildings all around. But in 1889, there were actually 30,000 citizens here in Johnstown, very industrial, resourceful citizens, many of whom worked at the Cambria Iron Company for about $1.50 a day. They worked their 10 and 12-hour shifts 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. So there was lots of promise in this town, lots of hope. This place was going somewhere. And most knew about the great dam 14 miles up the mountain, Lake Conemaugh, which became the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. They knew about it, but paid it little attention. Construction for the dam began in 1838, and it was a way to feed the canal system during the drought summer months. It was completed in 1852, but by then the railroads had come along, and there was no more need for canals. So the Pennsylvania Railroad Company bought it in 1857 just for the rites of passage, and then just let it sit. And it sat for more than 20 years before Pennsylvania Congressman John Riley bought it in 1875. 4 years later, he sold the dam for a loss to Benjamin Ruff, who would become the first shareholder in the new South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, resort area for all the rich magnates of the day. Andrew Carnegie would play here, the steel magnate, and Andrew Mellon, the big banker, and Robert Pitcairn, of the Pennsylvania Railroad Company. All the rich elites would come here to get away from Pittsburgh and have fun at the lake with their people. But before John Riley sold it to Benjamin Ruff in 1879, he removed the 5 discharge pipes from the bottom of the dam and sold them for scrap. And so that created a problem. Now the dam had no way of relieving pressure from the bottom out, and it created a weak spot in the bottom of the dam through the center of the dam. There was a spillway at the top that could relieve some pressure, but when the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club came along, they packed the lake with game fish from Lake Erie and put a wire mesh screen at the spillway so the fish could not escape. And that created a problem when debris began accumulating there. When the big rains came, the storm over Kansas and Nebraska started May 28th, 1889, and it rained here in Johnstown. It rained and rained and rained, and the rivers were filling up by more than a foot an hour. There was trouble at the dam. It was beginning to spill over the top. It was full. They tried to patch the top with rocks and mud and whatever they could find. None of it worked. They tried to unplug the spillway where the wire mesh screen was to relieve the pressure there. None of it worked. It just kept raining and raining and raining. And it all just spelled out a recipe for disaster. Check out Johnstown's beautiful City Hall building behind me. Really nice. There's a marker all the way up there. Yeah, that marks the level of the 30-foot lake left behind the day after the Johnstown flood. So welcome to the really nice little village of St. Michael. This was once the hub of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. We're right alongside where Lake Conemaugh used to be, and that's the clubhouse, the original clubhouse that still stands today, the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club clubhouse, founded by Benjamin Ruff. It was $800 to buy into the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, so that kept most of the townspeople from Johnstown out of the mix. They worked for meager wages, so they weren't a part of this, but the wealthy Pittsburghers were. The clubhouse is now owned by the National Park Service. You can't go inside right now. I hope one day we can get in there and check it out, but that was where the hub of activity took place for the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club here in St. Michael. Really nice little village, super nice. So giving you a look now of where Lake Conemaugh used to be, 2.5 miles long, about a mile wide, 20 million tons of water once sat up here at the South Fork Dam. And behind me is where the breach in the dam took place. You can see that's the visitor center for the Johnstown Flood Memorial. Maybe a little hard to tell, but down in the valley, I'm standing at the abutment right where the water or the lake poured through. Water had started coming over the dam about 1 o'clock that afternoon. Remember, it had been raining cold, hard rain for May all night. And into the day, it was still raining. The town of Johnstown was already flooded. They were used to that, where a little Stony Creek and the little Conemaugh rivers come together to form the big Conemaugh River. So it was already prone to flooding, and they had heard the warnings from the South Fork Dam before, but most just paid it little attention. But it was on May 30th, Friday afternoon, Black Friday, May 31st, yeah, where about 1 o'clock, it started pouring over the top of the dam. They did their best to patch it, and none of it helped. The cast iron pipes at the bottom, there were 5 of them that were removed, so there's no way to relieve pressure from the bottom, and the spillway at the top, which allowed water to pass through, got plugged up with debris because it had that wire mesh screen that Benjamin Ruff put there to keep the fish in. So, and of course, Benjamin Ruff also shaved off, that's hard to do, shaved off 4 or 5 feet at the top of the dam to allow carriage traffic, two-way carriage traffic, to go back and forth. So a recipe for disaster. It started spilling over about 1 o'clock, and then about 3:10, between 3:10 and 3:15, the middle of the dam just pushed out, and the water from the lake just emptied down the little Conemaugh River in preparation for its 14-mile descent down the mountain, 9 miles as the crow flies, down into Johnstown. Mineral Point was the first town to get completely obliterated and wiped off the map. Then East Conemaugh got it, but once it got past the bend at East Conemaugh on the river, it had a straight shot down into Johnstown, where the tumbling water, a 40-foot tall, high wave of water, by the time it got to Johnstown, completely, with all the debris that came with it, collected along the way, came crashing down on the good people of Johnstown just after 4 p.m. They never knew it was coming. There were warnings, there were telegraph messages that came down, but they've heard those before. They never knew it was coming until the rumble and roar of the giant wave was down upon them. And this is where the dam broke, right here. The raging floodwater from the broken dam 14 miles up the mountain eventually landed here against this original stone bridge, and with it brought all the accumulation, the steel, the wood, the timber, the boulders, the barns, the houses, everything accumulated here against this stone bridge. It sort of plugged up this end, and in fact what caused the 30-foot lake to settle in on the town of Johnstown. But it was here that as many as 100 people or more were trapped in the debris and couldn't escape. And to add salt to the wound, the pile of debris caught fire, and as many as 80 people burned to death right here at the base of this stone bridge. Just so sad. So the lake only took about 45 minutes to unload 20 million tons of water. The first place it would have come to would have been the village of South Fork, founded just a couple of years prior in 1887. But this would have been the path of the Great Flood as it cut through South Fork, the first town it met coming down from the mountain. Now South Fork was largely spared because, as you can see even today, the town was built up on the hillside, so the flood rushed right down through the middle. But South Fork, most of the people, certainly if not all the people, survived here because they were, for the most part, out of harm's way. But look at the hills around here, holding those floodwaters in for its path down to Johnstown, right through here. So I've made my way to Mineral Point alongside the East Conemaugh River behind me. It's raining now, and only fitting that it would be on this day. Mineral Point was completely obliterated. It was, South Fork was, the first town was largely spared, but Mineral Point was clean wiped off the map, just demolished. There's no sense in looking for original buildings that once stood or withstood the flood, because there are none. Everything built here was after the Johnstown flood. 16 people died here in Mineral Point. Eyewitnesses say they watched people go by, the houses floating by in the flood, people inside those houses. 16 people died here in Mineral Point. Next stop, East Conemaugh. So I've made my way to East Conemaugh, the second town that was all but obliterated. This would have been the path of the Great Flood as it charged through East Conemaugh. Great story here. Railroad engineer John Hess heard the rumble and roar of the flood coming, and he put his train in reverse and charged back down into East Conemaugh, you see behind me, with the whistles blowing so that some could get to the hillside before the Great Flood crashed its way through East Conemaugh. At least 50 people died here. Just incredible. Pretty little town. Raining today, just like it would have been on May 31st, 1889. The train tracks here in East Conemaugh are exactly where they were back in 1889. They parallel the Conemaugh River, Little Conemaugh River, and half the people who died here in East Conemaugh were carried away in their rail cars, just waiting. They couldn't go anywhere, and the Great Flood came down and literally carried the rail cars away with people inside on down to Johnstown. After destroying Mineral Point and East Conemaugh, Woodvale was next. Nearly 1/3 of the town's population lost their lives that day, 314 people in all. But the worst was yet to come. Here, the path of the Great Flood, the final descent down into Johnstown. Just minutes after 4 p.m., a 40-foot wall of water full of houses, barns, rocks, boulders, steel, timber, people, animals crashed down into Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Houses, buildings were either crushed or carried away. Men, women, and children were taken wholesale. At daybreak, people were in shock. There was no food to eat, much less any water to drink. There was no way in, no way out. 4 square miles of Johnstown, Pennsylvania was completely destroyed. Now the threat of a deadly pandemic took over. No medicine, no way to take care of the dead and dying that were laying and strewn about everywhere across the city. Temporary morgues were set up immediately. 90 here, 100 there. Hundreds were never found, buried in several feet of river muck. It was the biggest news story since the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Now, fortunately, help poured in from around the world. Clara Barton and her newly formed Red Cross moved in a week after the flood and set up shop in an old abandoned rail car, rolled her sleeves up and went to work, and worked with and on the good people of Johnstown, Pennsylvania for the next 5 months. On her way out, she was, as you might expect, hailed as a hero. Andrew Carnegie, for all the pain, built a brand new library in town, a Carnegie Library here in Johnstown, which is now the home of the Johnstown Flood Museum. But in the end, no one was ever held accountable for the Johnstown Flood. The graves in the unknown plot are marked by numbers, no names. Number 25, unknown female, about 15. Number 17, unknown man, about 50, short hair, smooth face. Number 66, small child, about a year. I think every American should visit Johnstown, Pennsylvania, if not for the sheer beauty of this place, nestled in the beautiful Allegheny Mountains, but out of respect, a sort of tip of the old hat to the lost generations who never came to be because of what didn't have to happen on that horrible day here in Johnstown, lest we forget.